When I was young, I really loved the Godzilla movies. Me and my dad really didn't tend to have much of a connection growing up. We didn't have things we both liked, but we both loved the Godzilla movies. I loved watching a bunch of different stories about these large monsters fighting against each other, and in particular, I really loved the stories of Godzilla and Mechagodzilla. And why am I mentioning this? Why am I adding this? It's because I want to make it clear that I love stories of kaijus and large mecha creatures. Things like Evangelion or anything with large, massive creatures that have to be overcome really strike a special place in my heart. And I want to make it incredibly clear because if I don't, I feel like without this context, it might sound like I'm being pretty negative. Today we're talking about Lancer, the mecha TTRPG, and I've gotten so many different suggestions to talk about this. So many people are clearly incredibly hyped about this, but to be honest with you, it wasn't really an RPG that I connected with, and yet I don't think that is a reason not to play it. My job here is to explain different RPGs in relation to D&D, to give you a comparison so that you feel excited to go in and play this game, and I do not intend to take that away from this video in any form or means. That being said, let me make it very clear and upfront so that you have the context for the rest of the video. Lancer is not a TTRPG I would play regularly at my table. And the reason for that is this. I prefer narrative-based stories. And while Lancer is not against narrative-based stories, it is not built for it either, and I think that is totally fine. I think it is built incredibly for the type of stories that it is meant to run, which is incredibly grounded, realistic combat scenarios of which you can roleplay out of. Which I know it sounds weird, right? Like we're talking about Lancer, which is a futuristic mecha RPG. I should probably backtrack a second here and explain what Lancer is. Lancer is an incredibly in-depth RPG that I think is incredible, honestly. Its design is amazing, that is based around mecha combat. And a lot of the game is focused on its lore, based in a futuristic setting where humans have achieved the peak of any kind of pinnacle technological advance. They now have created these massive mecha creatures which are meant to fight each other. And these mecha creatures are not the clumsy, bumbling things you would see in different types of stories. No, these are incredibly advanced. Many of them use biomechanical abilities, or they have rubber and latex and they have the ability to actually move like an actual creature. These mechs are absurdly advanced. And most of the RPG spends time on focusing what it looks like when these creatures clash together. And my younger self absolutely loves this concept. The idea of these massive combat mechs fighting against each other just really gets me going, and I actually do genuinely enjoy it. The mechs can range from anywhere from 8 feet tall to 45 feet tall. Massive skyscraper-like creatures fighting each other, and I think honestly that is incredible. The amount of height they actually have could be literally anything, and the point of the RPG is to be able to actually customize your mech, which is awesome. Lancer specifically focuses a lot on combat. In fact, I would say 4/5 of the rules themselves are combat. That is the bread and butter of this RPG, and I don't think it's a bad thing, but if you know anything about me and the types of stories I like to run, I like to focus on the narrative, which is not to say that Lancer does not have a narrative to focus on, but the rules themselves much more lend themselves to the combat, which is fine. The idea of Lancer is that you are choosing your character based off of the mech that you're going to run. The skills and abilities that you gain are only for the sake, for the most part, of piloting the mech itself. You kind of just accept that the mech that you're piloting is about 90% of your life, and honestly, I think that makes sense. If you're playing an RPG that is based around mech combat, yeah, you're gonna wanna focus on the mechs. That's what makes the absolute most sense. Why would you wanna focus on other things? The game is split in half, as the game describes, between combat and a different type of mode that it calls narrative mode. Now, narrative mode is telling more of the story outside of the combat mechs, but I'm gonna be 100% honest, I don't really think it's split in half. Most of the game is combat, and Lancer has an incredibly in-depth combat system that I will not be getting into in this video. Why? Because it's simply too much. I am supposed to tell you the types of stories that these systems tell, and Lancer is just too complex. The combat system is incredibly well designed, do not get me wrong, and anybody who loves combat-based systems needs to check this out. They will be pleased because the amount of customization, the amount of strategy, and the amount of narrative weight that is placed on different portions of the combat is incredible, and I'm not going to downplay that in the slightest. But I prefer focusing on things a little bit more narratively without the rules getting getting in the way, and I don't think it would work for my type of story. But that doesn't mean it won't work for you. And the idea of constantly bringing all of these different elements together is impressive and terrifying. And in order to do so, you generally have to have a very well organized note-taking system. And yes, I did just trick you. This is now a sponsor segment. Surprise! Today's sponsor is World Anvil. World Anvil is an incredible system that you can use online to create worlds in a wiki-style environment that is honestly one of the most impressive and helpful tools I've ever used. You can create maps, keep track of your characters, make notes, and also make sure that there are articles that are accessible to the players while still having a hidden DM's notes section so you could take your own notes on the side without the players seeing it. It is honestly so impressive and helpful for writers, storytellers, and of course, game masters. So if you want to go ahead and look it up so that you can keep the best notes possible for your table, go ahead and look at the links in the description and use the code PLAYYOURROLE for 10% off your first yearly subscription. Wait. I said 10%. It's actually 40% off your first yearly subscription. 40% off. Way better, right? Yeah, I definitely. Why do people pay me to do this? Anyways, back to talking about. To be totally honest, the fact that so many people were so intent on asking me to talk about Lancer means that there's a very passionate community around this, and I do think the combat system was amazing. But the game is based mostly around the combat. The narrative system is mainly based around that entire idea of creating a little bit of a story as a background and a framework for the combat. Most of the time when you're going through the narrative portion, it requires you to focus on trying to gain more resources and skills to pilot your mecha, which then, of course, inevitably leads to more combat. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Honestly, I could see easily when playing this game, combat is going to take up so much of your session, you probably will have 3 or 4 combat sessions in between each and every one social setting. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but that is definitely what the game seems to be geared around. But the combat is definitely worth it. Boasting a huge array of different mechas that you could choose from and a massive array of different combinations of abilities that you can choose from them when leveling up, I think it's awesome. Not only that, most of the leveling up system allows you to simply swap out things on your mechs, and I think that's pretty incredible. You can easily test things out, and if you don't like the abilities you chose last level, the next time you level up, you can replace all of them, no deal. But that does lead a little bit more into the setting. If you can easily swap out all of your abilities, how is that possible? The setting itself is one of the massive portions of Lancer, and I think it really needs to be focused on. The lore and the ability to look at the entire world that you've been placed into is impressively in depth, and I think probably going to be a lot of the focus of anybody who tries to run an RPG like this. See, like I said before, the future of Lancer is the future where all technology has reached its pinnacle. But there is a specific through line when reading through the rules. It is obvious that humanity has reached the pinnacle, and now it's only downhill from there. There seems to be a running through line through the rules of Lancer that makes it clear that humanity will always be its own downfall. It will always try to reach the highest peaks, and then it will always reach the lowest lows. And I think that is honestly very undervalued in storytelling, and I think a very fascinating story to tell. And I've made it clear that Lancer is focused on the combat, but that's because I think it is built to tell a story in the background based on the setting, which is really unique. You're going to see stories of human depravity in Lancer because that is just what it's built around. This entire idea of combat constantly with the most valued of all technology, the highest pinnacle that humanity could create is being used for destruction, is going to create a story of the lowest lows, of the fact that humanity knows no restraint, and while their hubris is their greatest strength, it will always be their greatest weakness. And I think that is very fun to tell. Not only that, the downtime rules really focus on just basically allowing you to get more resources for your mechs, but it's going to lead more into that intrigue of story. The story of the fact that everybody just wants to become more powerful. Everybody wants to use this technology to get more and more powerful, and it's going to lead into a little bit more of a political intrigue type setting. See, the implication is at any time you could 3D print any of the items you need to make your mech more powerful. The only question is, do you have the clearance and level to be able to do that? Which leads to even more fascinating storytelling, and it's why I think Lancer, despite the fact that it's not a game I personally would run, should never be overlooked. Because the world building is so incredibly unique, it leads to natural storytelling. If you could 3D print any of this stuff, then obviously you have to ask yourself the question, why haven't you in the first place? Because you are not high enough standing in society. Humanity has created the peak of all technology, but their society still ends up getting in the way. I think it is a totally fascinating way of telling the story, and while yes, it is incredibly number crunchy, I still think it shouldn't be overpassed for the amount of narrative it could tell. Now, is it a narrative that I personally want to tell? No, but I hope that you do, because I think it is a super fun story to tell, and I should not phase over the incredible designs of the mechs. When you look at these things, I can't help but feel just a little bit excited. I don't prefer this combat heavy of a type of system, but it is still amazing to think about these different types of mechs in the actual combat. Not only that, there's incredible support for this system. Not only does Lancer have some incredible rules, it also has incredible tools outside of the actual game, which allow you to visualize and actually plan out this combat. Make your mech how you need to, make your character how you need to really move forward. And I have applied those links in the description so you can go check out those incredible tools. Honestly, I think Lancer, while it is very crunchy and rules heavy, is an awesome system for a very specific type of story, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Telling a specific story just means you have a certain message you want to communicate. And while I don't think Lancer is a catch-all system where you could tell every type of story you wanted to, I do think it is incredible for what it is meant to be. And I think everybody should explore it in the way that it seems to have been intended to explore the depravity of humanity, the hubris of them, and also, of course, awesome fucking giant robot anime fights. And why would you not enjoy doing that? If you want to hear me talk about a system where you can play superheroes and play out your fantasies in the MCU, you can watch this video right here. Go out into the world, make it your own, you beautiful bastards. Don't forget to play your role.